Harrison Bennett had spent most of his adult life believing he was unshakable, a man carved from steady routines and quiet resilience. But the night his blind date canceled on him was the night he felt something inside himself tilt, not violently, not dramatically, but with the slow, defeated bend of a branch that had held too much snow for too long. He stood outside the warm glow of the restaurant's entrance, clutching his phone like it was the last fragile piece of hope he had allowed himself in years, staring at the message that read, "Sorry, I can't make it tonight anymore." 7 words that carried no apology. 7 words that erased the courage he had scraped together to show up again, to try again, to let his heart consider the possibility of healing after 3 long years of surviving the emptiness left behind by Amelia's death. He breathed out, the exhale forming a thin ghost in the cold evening air, and he blinked against the sting in his eyes that wasn't sadness exactly, but something heavier, something like the exhaustion of a man who had tried to be strong for too long. He pushed his phone back into his pocket, tightened his jacket, adjusted the tired slump of his shoulders, and began walking toward the parking lot with the familiar dull acceptance that life, for him, was meant to be a series of small disappointments softened only by the love he had for his son. Liam, 7 years old, bursting with curiosity and energy, was the anchor that kept him from drifting too far into the numbness that grief had carved into him. He would go home, he told himself, heat up leftovers, tuck Liam into bed, and pretend this evening had never happened. But fate had a strange, sharp-edged way of interrupting the paths people thought they were meant to walk. And as Harrison stepped into the long stretch of the dimly lit parking lot, he saw her. A woman in a red evening gown stood barefoot beside a silver luxury car, her silhouette wavering slightly under the harsh, humming fluorescent lights that cast unforgiving white shadows over the pavement. The gown looked like something out of a magazine, rich fabric, intricate details, the kind of dress that belonged to a ballroom, not to a cold parking lot where the night seemed to swallow sound. Her hair was meticulously styled, though now it fell in soft disarray around her shoulders, strands clinging to her cheeks, dampened by tears she wasn't wiping away. She was beautiful, breathtaking in a way that didn't seem real. But none of that mattered, because the first thing he noticed wasn't her beauty. It was her heartbreak. Her hands trembled as they pressed against the locked door of the sleek car, and she whispered something to herself, a choked sound, as if she were trying to hold the world together with nothing but the fragile force of her will. Harrison paused, halfway between wanting to respect her privacy and being unable to ignore the silent devastation radiating from her. Something about her posture, shoulders drawn up protectively, head bowed, bare feet curling against the cold asphalt, reminded him of someone drowning without water. He took a slow step forward, not wanting to scare her, letting the gravel crunch under his boots in warning. "Hey," he called gently, his voice soft but carrying across the stillness. "Are you all right?" She flinched, whipping her head around so abruptly that the red fabric around her swayed, catching the light like liquid wine. For a moment her eyes widened in pure fear, the kind that didn't come from being approached by a stranger, but from expecting the wrong people to find her. But when she saw him, just a tired man in a worn jacket with kindness etched into the lines of his face, that fear softened into confusion, then hesitation. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out at first. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked like thin ice. "I'm fine," she said, but it was the kind of fine people say when they are about to break into pieces. Harrison didn't confront the lie. He knew how to recognize the brittle tone of someone pretending. Instead, he let his gaze fall to her bare feet, the way her toes curled inward, trying to find warmth on the freezing asphalt. "It's pretty cold to be standing out here without shoes," he said carefully, keeping his tone gentle, inviting her to talk if she wanted, but not demanding anything. She swallowed hard and glanced down at her feet as if she had forgotten she was barefoot. "I left," she murmured, voice shaky. "I just left. The shoes didn't feel important at the time." Something inside him tightened. He had no idea what she'd run from, and yet he immediately sensed that whatever it was had been suffocating her. Without another word, he removed his jacket and stepped toward her slowly, draping it across her shoulders. She stiffened at the touch, breath hitching, but then she melted just slightly into the warmth, pulling the jacket closed with trembling fingers. It dwarfed her, its rough fabric absorbing the glittering elegance of her gown. But she seemed to relax, for the first time since he'd seen her. "Thank you," she whispered, and there was something raw in the way she said it, as if no one had shown her undeserved kindness in a very long time. "Is your car locked?" Harrison asked, motioning to the handle she had been tugging helplessly. She nodded, a mixture of anger and despair crossing her face. "My keys are inside. I wasn't thinking clearly when I got out." Her voice broke on the last word, and she turned away, pressing her hand to her mouth as her shoulders trembled. Harrison resisted the urge to reach out, to steady her, to tell her she wasn't alone. "I can call a locksmith," he offered. "He'll come out here, open it for you." She hesitated, a war flickering in her eyes between wanting to refuse and desperately needing help. Finally, she whispered, "Please." He nodded and made the call, keeping his voice low, steady, wanting to ground her with calmness. When he hung up, he motioned to the curb nearby. "Come on, let's sit while we wait." She glanced at the ground, then the gown, and let out a hollow laugh. "This night can't get worse anyway," she muttered, lowering herself onto the curb with the elegance of someone raised to hide discomfort. Harrison sat beside her, leaving just enough space to make her feel safe, but not abandoned. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was strange, not awkward, but suspended, heavy with unspoken stories. Finally, he broke it gently. "Whatever happened tonight," he said, "you don't have to explain it. But you don't have to go through it alone either." A few seconds passed before she whispered, "I walked out of my engagement party." His brows lifted, not in judgment, but surprise. "Engagement party? So you're—" "No," she interrupted, voice sharp with pain. "I didn't agree to it. I didn't want it. It wasn't my choice." Her hands curled into fists on her lap. "My father decided everything. The venue, the announcement, even the man I was supposed to marry." Harrison looked at her for a long moment, seeing not a glamorous woman in a red gown, but someone suffocating under the weight of a life she hadn't chosen. "So you ran," he said softly. "Yes," she murmured, tears gathering again. "I ran, and I don't know where to go now." He wanted to say something comforting, something profound. But before he could speak, she leaned her head against his shoulder, hesitantly, like she wasn't sure she had the right to seek comfort, but was too broken to deny it. He froze, breath caught, the sudden closeness stirring emotions he hadn't felt in years. But then slowly, gently, he let his shoulder relax beneath her, allowing her to lean. She closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, falling onto the sleeve of his shirt. "I don't even know your name," she whispered, voice small and lost. "That's okay," he murmured. "You're safe. That's what matters." She exhaled shakily, and the sound echoed painfully inside him. For a moment, the parking lot faded, and all he felt was the fragile trust in the way she leaned against him. "My name is Harrison," he said after a moment. She lifted her head slightly, her gaze meeting his with surprising softness. "Harrison," she repeated quietly, like it steadied her. But before she could finish, a sleek black sedan turned sharply into the parking lot, headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. Harrison felt her tense violently beside him, her entire body going rigid. The car came to a stop. Two men in tailored suits stepped out with the precision of people who were trained to follow orders. Their eyes locked on her instantly, and Harrison realized, with a sinking feeling, that whatever she had run from wasn't finished chasing her. Harrison's muscles tensed the second the black sedan came to a stop, its engine cutting out with an ominous finality that made the air feel colder. The woman beside him, whose name he still didn't know, froze completely, her breath catching in her throat as if her lungs had turned to glass. Her fingers clutched the edges of his jacket so tightly that her knuckles trembled. She didn't blink, didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe, and that told Harrison everything he needed to know about the men who stepped out of the car. They weren't friends. They weren't helpful strangers. They were the thing she had been running from. The taller man scanned the parking lot with sharp eyes, landing on her instantly, his posture stiffening with recognition. "Miss Ashford," he called out, his voice cutting through the quiet evening like a blade. She flinched violently at the name, and Harrison felt her grip tighten on his sleeve. "Please," she whispered under her breath, barely audible. "Don't let them take me. Not yet." Harrison had no idea what he was promising when he said calmly, "I won't." The shorter man lifted a small device, likely her phone tracker or some private locator the wealthy used to keep tabs on their own. "We've been looking for you," he said, tone cold and professional. "Your father is worried." Her face twisted with something between panic and anger. "He is not worried," she snapped, her voice shaking so hard the sentence quivered. "He is furious. That's not the same thing." The men exchanged a glance, but their expressions didn't soften. They stepped closer. All business, all authority, all control. Harrison instinctively shifted his stance, placing himself slightly in front of her, forming a barrier without thinking. The taller guard eyed him with clear irritation, as if Harrison were an obstacle he hadn't calculated for. "Sir," the guard said, voice clipped. "This is a family matter. We need you to step aside." Harrison didn't step aside. "She doesn't want to go with you," he said, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Tonight, that matters." The shorter guard scoffed. "You don't understand the situation?" "No," she suddenly cut in, stepping out from behind Harrison, her lips shaking. "You don't understand the situation. I said no. I'm not going back." The taller guard sighed with exasperation, rubbing his forehead like she was a child throwing a tantrum. "Veronica," he said, and the name struck the air between them like a revelation. "Your father instructed us to bring you home. You know how this works. Stop making this harder." So that was her name, Veronica. It suited her somehow, elegant, sharp, carrying the weight of expectations. Veronica's face paled at the sound of it. "I'm not going back," she whispered again, but her voice was barely holding together. The guards didn't budge. They approached in a slow, looming advance that made Harrison's pulse thrum with protective instinct. The shorter one lifted a hand. "We are not going to argue with you in a parking lot. Come with us, now." Harrison felt Veronica step closer to him again, her entire body trembling from fear or fury or both. "Harrison," she whispered, her voice cracking in a way that hit him square in the chest. "Please." He didn't know what the hell he was doing. He didn't know these men, didn't know her world, didn't know what consequences might follow the next few seconds. But he knew one thing. She was terrified, and he couldn't stand by while someone terrified was being forced into a car like a prisoner. So he squared his shoulders and said simply, "She's not going with you." The taller man stepped forward, towering over Harrison by a few inches. "This is not your business." "It is now," Harrison replied, steady, unbeacon. The man stared him down. Harrison didn't flinch. Something in the guard's gaze hardened. "Move," he ordered. But Harrison didn't. And that moment, small, quiet, defiant, ignited chaos. Veronica grabbed Harrison's sleeve. "Please drive," she begged. "Please." He nodded once, decisive. "Let's go." The guards realized what was happening a second too late as Harrison grabbed Veronica's hand and ran with her toward his car. "Hey!" one guard shouted behind them. "Stop!" But they didn't stop. The parking lot blurred around them, lights smearing into streaks as their footsteps pounded the pavement. She stumbled once, barefoot, but Harrison caught her, lifting her just enough to keep her moving. The guard's footsteps thundered behind them. Harrison unlocked his car with a sharp beep, practically shoving Veronica inside before sprinting around to the driver's seat. The moment he hit the ignition, the guards reached the door and slammed their palms against the window. "Open the door!" one yelled. "Veronica, this is insane!" Harrison floored the gas. The tires screeched violently, and the car shot forward, ripping out of the parking space as the guards jumped back, shouting in anger and shock. Veronica pressed herself against the seat, her breath shaking so hard she could barely inhale. Harrison's pulse roared in his ears as he maneuvered out of the lot, weaving through the narrow exit and accelerating down the main road. After 2 long minutes of tense silence, he glanced at the rearview mirror and let out a sigh of relief. "They're not following." Veronica collapsed against the passenger seat, burying her face in her hands as sobs shook through her. Not small, quiet tears like before. Now, these were violent, exhausted sobs that sounded like a lifetime of pressure finally cracking open. Harrison gripped the steering wheel, unsure if he should touch her, unsure if she'd want the comfort or recoil from it. "You're okay," he said gently. "You're safe. They're gone." She shook her head, voice muffled by her hands. "They're never gone," she choked out. "They'll find me. They always find me." "Not tonight," Harrison replied softly, but with conviction. "Tonight, you get to breathe." Her sobs slowed slightly, though her shoulders continued to tremble. 5 minutes passed. 10. Harrison drove aimlessly, letting her cry, letting the night soften around them. Eventually, her breathing steadied enough for her to speak. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to drag you into this." "You didn't drag me into anything," he replied. "I made a choice." She turned her face toward the window, her tear-streaked reflection looking back at her like a stranger. "I hate that they treat me like property," she said softly. "Like I'm an asset, a bargaining chip, a tool." "You're not," Harrison said. "You're a person, a human being." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "Not in my family's world." He didn't know what to say to that. Instead, he turned the steering wheel and guided the car into a quiet neighborhood with dim streetlights and cozy houses. She blinked, frowning. "Where are we going?" "To get something to eat," he answered. "You haven't eaten, have you?" She hesitated. "Not really." "Thought so," he said gently. He parked in front of a tiny 24-hour diner, the kind with flickering neon signs and windows glowing warm yellow from inside. It wasn't fancy, or impressive, or anything she'd be used to, but it was safe, and it was quiet. When they stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled, and a tired waitress glanced up, smiled warmly, and gestured toward a booth. Veronica slid into the red leather seat, clutching Harrison's jacket around herself like a shield. Harrison sat across from her, watching her carefully. The waitress poured them water and left them with menus. Veronica stared at hers, like she had never seen diner food before. "I haven't been to a place like this in my life," she admitted. "It's simple." "Simple is good," Harrison said with a small smile. "Simple is honest." She traced the rim of her glass with her finger. "Do you come here often?" "Sometimes," he said, "when I need a break, when life gets heavy." "Is it heavy often?" she asked softly. He paused. "It was," he said, "after Amelia died." Veronica met his eyes with a gentleness he didn't expect. "You loved her," she said quietly. "A lot." "Yeah," he murmured, looking down. "I did." The waitress returned, and they ordered. Harrison a burger. Veronica the same, because she didn't know what else to choose. When the food arrived, steaming and simple and imperfect, Veronica stared at the plate like it was a foreign object. Then she took a bite, and her eyes widened. "This is actually amazing," she whispered, shocked. Harrison laughed, the first real laugh he'd felt in days. Not everything good has to be expensive. She smiled shyly and took another bite, then another, eating like someone who hadn't realized how hungry they were until confronted with something warm and comforting. They talked, slowly at first, then more easily as the minutes passed. She told him about her childhood, about the strict schedules, the tutors, the fancy schools, the absence of freedom. He told her about Liam, about raising a child alone, about the days when grief felt like drowning, and the nights when his son's laughter kept him afloat. Something fragile and beautiful formed between them in that booth, a connection that shouldn't have existed, carved out of fear and pain and chance. After they finished eating, Harrison paid the bill, and they returned to the car. She hesitated before opening the door. "Will you take me somewhere?" she asked softly. "Home?" "No," she whispered. "Anywhere but home." He nodded. "Okay, I know a place." He drove her up a quiet hill overlooking the city, a spot he sometimes went to when the world felt too loud. The city lights glimmered below them like scattered stars. Veronica stepped out of the car barefoot, the grass cold beneath her feet. But she didn't flinch. She walked a few steps toward the edge of the viewpoint, inhaling the crisp night air. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Yeah," Harrison said, stepping beside her. "It is." She closed her eyes, letting the wind sweep through her hair. "I don't know who I am without them," she whispered, "without the expectations, without the pressure, without the cage." "Then maybe tonight is a start," Harrison said softly. She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them, something tentative, but real. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying, for helping me, for not asking too much." "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "I just didn't want you to feel alone." For a moment they stood there in silence, the wind wrapping around them like a fragile shield from everything that waited beyond this hill. But silence can't hold forever. Her phone buzzed in his jacket pocket, where she'd tucked it earlier to hide it. She froze. Harrison pulled it out and saw the name on the screen. Her father. The man who had tried to decide her entire life. The man she had run from. The man she feared more than she hated. Veronica's face went white. Harrison let the phone ring until it fell silent. Then he turned it off. Completely off. Veronica exhaled shakily, the relief so palpable it almost knocked her off her feet. "What do I do now?" she whispered, trembling again. Harrison took a slow breath, turning to face her fully. "You stay with me," he said gently. "Just for tonight." Her eyes softened. "Why?" "Because you shouldn't face the world alone when you're breaking," he replied. "Everyone deserves one night to breathe." She swallowed hard, emotion flickering across her face like a fragile candle flame. "Okay," she whispered. "Tonight, I'll stay." And for the first time since he'd met her in that cold parking lot, Veronica Ashford looked like someone who was finally beginning to choose her own life. Harrison drove slowly back down the hill, careful on each curve of the dimly lit road, as if the entire world had become fragile, as if one wrong turn might shatter the tiny, trembling peace that had begun to form between him and the woman beside him. Veronica sat curled in the passenger seat, still wrapped in his jacket, her bare feet tucked beneath the hem of her ruined gown, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the dashboard lights. She looked exhausted, emotionally drained in a way that made her appear years younger and years older all at once. But she also looked strangely serene, as though for the first time in her life she wasn't performing, wasn't posing, wasn't trying to be. Anything she wasn't. She was simply existing, breathing in a space where no one demanded she be perfect. Harrison didn't ask her any questions. He didn't ask where she wanted to go next, or what she planned to do tomorrow, or what consequences would come when the sun rose. For now, it was enough that she was breathing easier, that she wasn't trembling as violently as before, that she wasn't being dragged back into a life she hadn't chosen. After a quiet 15 minutes, they pulled into Harrison's neighborhood, where the houses were modest and the streets were clean but worn, a world far removed from the glittering, suffocating empire she'd been raised in. "Is this where you live?" Veronica asked softly. Harrison nodded. "Yeah, it's quiet. Nobody bothers us here." They approached a single-story house with a small porch and a dim porch light flickering faintly. Toys were scattered on the lawn. Plastic dinosaurs, a small soccer ball, a half-built cardboard fort Liam and Harrison had been working on the previous weekend. It was the picture of normalcy, of real life, the kind untouched by wealth or legacy or pressure. Veronica stared at it like she was seeing another planet. When they stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of laundry detergent and vanilla candles. A pair of tiny sneakers sat by the door, and a coloring book lay open on the coffee table, half-finished pages filled with enthusiastic scribbles. Harrison motioned toward the couch. "Make yourself comfortable," he said. "I'll get you something warm to wear. That dress must be freezing." She swallowed, her eyes scanning the living room with a tenderness he didn't expect. "This is your home," she murmured. "It feels safe." Harrison paused for a moment, absorbing her words, then nodded and disappeared down the hallway. When he returned, he held a folded sweatshirt and a pair of soft sweatpants, clothes that were far too big for her, but warm, comfortable, and safe. "Here," he said quietly. "You can change in the bathroom." She took the clothes reverently, like they were something precious, and headed to the small bathroom at the end of the hall. When she emerged 15 minutes later, her red gown folded neatly over her arm, she looked like a different person. The oversized sweatshirt hung loosely off one shoulder, the sweatpants cinched awkwardly at her waist, and her long hair fell around her face without its earlier perfection. But there was something about her in this softness, something heartbreakingly human. "I look ridiculous," she said, attempting a small smile. "You look comfortable," Harrison replied, and the warmth in his voice made her cheeks flush. For a few moments they just stood there, the silence stretching between them like a hesitant embrace neither knew how to initiate. Then a sound came from one of the bedrooms, a tiny, sleepy groan. Harrison stiffened. "That's Liam," he murmured. "He must have woken up." Before Veronica could respond, a small boy with messy brown hair and pajama pants covered in cartoon dinosaurs appeared in the hallway, rubbing his eyes and squinting toward the light. "Dad?" he mumbled. "Is it morning?" "No, buddy," Harrison said softly, kneeling in front of him. "It's still night. Go back to bed." But Liam was already staring at Veronica with wide, curious eyes. "Who's that?" he whispered, voice filled with wonder. Veronica blinked, surprised at the gentle question. For some reason, Liam's presence seemed to soften her even more. Harrison opened his mouth to explain, but Veronica stepped forward before he could answer. She crouched down so she was eye level with the boy. "Hi," she said gently. "My name is Veronica." Liam looked at her sweatshirt, then her face, then her bare feet. "Are you a friend of my dad?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," she whispered, surprising even herself. "I am." Liam smiled, with the unfiltered joy only a child could manage. "Do you want to see my dinosaur drawings?" Veronica blinked. She had faced business titans, scheming executives, reporters, suitors, and political elites, but she looked more overwhelmed by this small boy holding out a crumpled page of colored dinosaurs than she had by anything else that night. "I would love to," she said with a soft laugh, and something inside her loosened. Harrison watched them from a few feet away, Liam proudly showing her scribbled drawings, Veronica listening intently, asking questions, smiling in a way he hadn't seen since the moment he found her in the parking lot. She looked like a woman discovering what warmth felt like for the first time. After a few minutes, Liam's eyelids began drooping. Harrison scooped him up gently, and the boy rested his head on his father's shoulder. "Night-night," Liam mumbled toward Veronica. "Good night, Liam," she whispered back. The boy drifted to sleep, and Harrison carried him back to his bedroom, tucking him into bed with practiced tenderness before returning to the living room. Veronica stood there, her arms folded lightly around herself. "He's incredible," she murmured. "He's my whole world," Harrison said. She nodded, absorbing that truth. "You're a good father." "I try." Another quiet fell between them, not heavy, not awkward, but contemplative. Eventually, Harrison motioned toward the couch. "You can sleep here tonight," he said. "I'll take the floor." "No," she said quickly. "I don't want to take your space." "You're not taking anything." She hesitated. "I've never slept in someone else's house before," she admitted. "Not like this. Not without planning or security checks or permission." He studied her closely. "Do you feel safe here?" She met his eyes. "Yes, more than I have in years." Harrison exhaled softly. "Then that's enough." She pulled the blanket over herself on the couch, the soft fabric enveloping her like a protective shield. Harrison turned off the lights, leaving only the gentle glow of a lamp in the corner. As he lay on the floor nearby, he glanced at her one last time. Her eyes were already closing, her breathing slowing, her expression peaceful for the first time since he'd met her. "Good night, Harrison," she whispered into the quiet. "Good night, Veronica," he replied. The house settled into stillness. Outside, the world continued spinning, unaware that two lives inside were slowly beginning to intertwine. But peace is fragile, and morning carries its own storms. She was gone, Harrison woke to sunlight streaming through the blinds, the smell of coffee lingering faintly in the air, and an inexplicable emptiness in the living room. The blanket that had covered Veronica lay folded neatly on the couch, his jacket placed carefully atop it. Her borrowed clothes were gone, and so was she. A sharp, unexpected ache unfurled behind his ribs. He checked the door, unlocked. He checked the street, empty. No note, no goodbye, no explanation. It felt too familiar, too much like the moment he had walked into a hospital room and realized Amelia was gone forever. That same hollow punch in the chest, that same echo of loss. He sat heavily on the couch, running a hand through his hair, as if that would steady the ground beneath him. But before he could sink too deeply into that ache, there was a knock on the door. Sharp, urgent, not friendly. Harrison tensed immediately. He opened the door. 2 men in suits stood on his porch. The same men, the same ones from the parking lot. The taller one adjusted his tie, scanning Harrison with a cool, assessing gaze. "Mr. Bennett," he said smoothly, "we need to speak with you." Harrison's jaw tightened. "I don't know where she is." "So she was here," the shorter guard replied, confirming what they already suspected. "Where did she go?" "I told you," Harrison said, voice cold. "I don't know." The taller man leaned forward. "Mr. Bennett, Veronica is the heiress to a multi-billion-dollar corporate empire. Her disappearance is not a small matter. Her father is furious and desperate. If you are hiding her, you need to tell us now." "I'm not hiding anyone," Harrison snapped. "She left." "When?" "I don't know. Early. Before sunrise." The guards exchanged glances, their frustration clear. "We will be in touch," the taller one said. "If she contacts you, you inform us immediately." "She won't," Harrison replied. "She's running from all of you." They glared at him, then walked back to their car. The moment they left, Harrison sank onto his porch steps, and for the first time since his wife died, he felt a new kind of ache. Not grief, not loneliness, but the sharp pain of losing someone he wasn't ready to lose. Days passed, then a week, then 2. Harrison returned to work, took Liam to school, lived his life as usual. But part of his mind kept drifting back to the woman in the red gown who had cried in a parking lot and found refuge on his couch. He didn't expect to see her again. He didn't expect anything. But fate, once again, had other plans. It was a rainy Thursday evening when he heard another knock at the door, softer this time, hesitant. Harrison opened the door, and there she was. Veronica Ashford stood on his porch, drenched from the rain, hair plastered to her cheeks, clothes simple but soaked through, eyes wide and trembling. But not with fear this time, with certainty, relief, hope. "Harrison," she whispered, her voice cracking like lightning against the storm. Before he could speak, she threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest, her entire body shaking against him. He wrapped his arms around her instinctively, holding her as if she had been gone for years instead of weeks. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry I left. I didn't know what to do. They took me home, locked everything down, watched my every move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sleep. All I could think about was you and Liam and that night on the hill when I finally felt like I existed. I had to come back. I had to." Harrison pulled back just enough to look at her, to search her eyes. "Veronica," he whispered, "are you sure?" Her answer came not in words, but in the way she cupped his face with her trembling hands, the way her eyes softened with unspoken truth, the way her breath mingled with his as she whispered, "I choose this. I choose you. I choose the life that feels real." And when her lips touched his, it wasn't passion or impulse or desperation. It was freedom. It was healing. It was the beginning of something both of them had believed they would never feel again. And this time, neither of them ran.